problem of evil is the biggest problem for both Christians and atheists. And there is this line that sort of says, if you're an atheist and you say that there's a problem of evil, you need to be able to account for where evil comes from.
Yes, or what evil is.
Yeah, and I think that's fair enough, which is why I'm always careful to talk about what I'd rather call like the problem of suffering.
Yes,
which is to
that's
say,
okay.
I just wouldn't predict it's not that there would be no suffering whatsoever, but it's the arbitrariness of it,
Yeah,
the
I know.
intensity.
That's the hard bit.
Yes.
The apparent
it's that.
arbitrariness of it. Yes, absolutely.
And I know that there are people who... And the problem of evil and divine hiddenness are kind of versions of the same problem.
It is.
Which is, why does God allow bad things to happen? And I think that in individual cases, there are things you can say. But on the whole, I cannot... I find it difficult to believe that there isn't at least one person who sincerely just cannot be convinced that God exists.
And I think one of the hard parts is a lot of times when you're having these discussions, it's important to remember a lot of times you just want to jump in with the logic part of it. It's like, well, logically, a good God could allow some evil to happen for a greater good. We hear that argument a lot. I think a mistake that a lot of Christians make is we leave out the emotional part of it when the problem of evil is actually two things. Like, okay, is it logically plausible that a good God can allow evil to happen? And then there's the other half, which is, why me? Like, why me, God? And I think that's the part that gets a lot of people. And it's all blended together in this very, very serious emotion. And I think John Lennox is going to do a good job at talking about this. So let's get into it.
And there's no boiling rage. There's no hatred. There's no resistance. They just can't believe it. And I also believe that there's at least one person who has suffered arbitrary, gratuitous suffering that could have easily been avoided had it been in accordance with the will of the sustainer of the universe. I find those two very difficult to disbelieve, and I also find them very difficult to square with the existence of a God who loves us all and wants to come to know us all.
And therefore, we have to find some kind of way in. I share that question with you. I'll be totally open. The level of one's own personal experience then becomes important.
Yeah.
And I think I may have raised this last time, perhaps we didn't have time. It's because this is a real issue and not a trivial issue. The question for me is there any evidence, oblique or indirect evidence of any kind, that I can trust God with it? Now, that's as hard a question, because you all know the undergraduate type of argument, surely a good God, where does Lucretius' problem, it's all of that, David Hume raised it, and all the rest. And we never get anywhere.
Yes.
Ever. And so I'm a mathematician, and when mathematicians have tried for a few hundred years to answer a question, they can't. They very sensibly try to change the question. And so I changed the question to that equally difficult one. Is there any evidence that we can trust God with it? And that's where my personal experience, based on the revelation in Scripture of the life of Jesus and the way he responded, not only...
Yeah, I would agree with that. And for me, when I had hard times in life, there's two different paths you can go. You can go, well, life is meaningless anyways, and so the suffering means nothing, and there's going to be no justice in the end if atheism is true. But for me, the only way through that is really looking at the cross. If I see the cross and I see that God allowed himself to suffer with us, I know that I'm not alone and that there's actually a God that does care and does have compassion. And then there's this belief and this act of faith that no, actually he is going to make things better one day. Everything will be made right. And that is one of the things that personally keeps me through, is looking at the cross and knowing that God actually suffered himself. He knows what it feels like, and he knows what we go through. And if you guys are interested in more videos like this, talking about these very deep topics, please feel free to hit the subscribe button, and I'll try to make these videos as good as I can. How's my audio, by the way? Leave some comments on the audio and let me know how I'm doing.
Let's get back to it. But his own suffering. That's where I see the way in. And that's where I see people who are really suffering being helped. What I mean by that, Alex, is this. There are two aspects and perspectives on this. The perspective we have at the moment sitting here is observing suffering.
Mm-hmm.
It's one thing to observe it, it's another thing to experience it.
Yes.
Now, most people
Totally
are a mixture.
different.
They see gratuitous suffering here, they're suffering maybe a toothache themselves. But those two perspectives are different to a certain extent. And one needs intellectual answers, the other needs pastoral answers.
Yeah,
and it seems to me that we need to have a pastoral understanding, which is, from my perspective, a deep sympathy, recognizing the depth of the objection you've raised, that it is real. It's not pretend. People aren't pretending. And the way you formulate it interests me, because you're the only one that's put it that way. And that is, I can't imagine that there isn't a person like this. Well, I just go with you. I can't either. So,
and one of the things that I want to point out, which I think a lot of Christians, especially on the more intellectual side, is we try to just go for the logic and be like, oh, well, you see, logically, it's plausible that a good God can allow evil to happen so that we can have a choice to love him. And it's because of our choice that it happened. And logically, it works out that, it can. And we completely miss the emotional side of things. We just go straight to the logic and see, haha, your argument's wrong. And then you don't actually get to know the person, and you don't actually see the individual that is suffering right before you. Our job as Christians is not just to dispense with some sort of logical argument. It's to minister to the people in front of us that are suffering. And I think a lot of times when we get into these arguments, we forget that. And that's not good.
How does one approach people like that? But there's no generic person. They're individuals. And I find that all the time. People constantly ask me, what would you say to a person who? I said, unless I know that person, I wouldn't know what to say to them. I think people are too quick to provide what I would call a generic answer to a question, and it's meaningless because we're all individuals and our psychology, our emotional experience goes very deep. And the key thing, it seems to me, that has guided me all my life, I must take you seriously. What you say, how you act, how you feel, how you think. And I must open myself up to the questions that are moving you at their deepest. To some of them, I will have no immediate answer. It would be foolish to claim. But I'll go away and think about those things in the hope that even within that context with a suffering person, I can show sufficient empathy to perhaps open a new window of opportunity to them. Like in New Zealand, when I got there just after the earthquake, and I had to give a whole lot of talks on this topic, and it wasn't easy because natural disasters are harder than moral disasters. We understand war and bombs, and but earthquakes are different.
Acts of God.
Yes, that's right. And I spoke on this business about this other type of question: is there enough evidence to trust God? And as I finished one talk in the biggest congregation this church had for years, in the Christchurch where the earthquake happened, a note was pushed into my hand as I left the platform. And I was told a lady had passed it in. And it just said this: I lost my husband in the earthquake. You have shown the first ray of light that I have had on this. And she signed it. I was deeply moved by that. She didn't get a solution in that sense. But she felt she'd seen a way in. And to my mind, Alex, it really is one of the evidences of the truth of Christianity, the array of people throughout history that have in the deepest of suffering in all kinds of circumstances. How it is possible that even persecution refined the church and people were stronger. I'm amazed at that. And I've met some people who've shown immense courage, particularly in Siberia. People were in the gulag and all this kind of thing. And they told me how God had helped them to face it. Now, you have to listen to people seriously. I remember one chap who really, in a sense.
And before we go into that, it's really interesting how, you have the dichotomy of some people use their suffering as a means to say that there is no God because why didn't he help me? And then other people through suffering say, oh, there is a God because he did help me. He didn't make the suffering go away necessarily, but he helped me through it. And that's a really interesting dichotomy. What do you guys think? Do you guys think that, just what do you think about that? Some people they suffer and they say there can't be a God because I'm suffering or I didn't find a way out. And then other people suffer and they say, oh, I think there is a God because he brought me a way in and he brought me through it. I'd be curious to hear your guys' thoughts on that.
Humiliated me, if I'm open about it. He was a very short chap for this height. And he told me he'd been put in the gulag for 7 years because of his faith. He was teaching young people.
Hey.
And he just looked up at me and he said, you couldn't face that, could you? Well, I was so embarrassed.
Yeah.
I said, no, I couldn't. And then he smiled. I'd never forget his smile. He said, nor could I. But he said, I discovered something. I said, what was that? Well, he said, when I went into the gulag, I would faint at the sight of my own blood if I cut myself shaving. And I saw things there that no man should ever have to see in terms of gratuitous cruelty. But you know what he said? I discovered that God comes in and he acts in the situation, not before it. And that has stuck with me for all of my life because it resonates with what Jesus said to his disciples when he told them they'd be brought before courts, they'd be tried, they'd be persecuted.
Yeah.
And that they would know in that hour. And I think there's enough evidence in my mind, personally, talking to people to whom it has happened, that this relationship with God is so real that in one sense it comes in to encourage people subjectively in situations that they cannot plan for, that are gratuitous, that are horrible, and supports them. To my mind, that's part of the evidence. And it's what I would expect to happen if Christianity is true. It still doesn't completely answer your question.
Yeah, I mean, because the cynic in me wants to say, well, if religion is just a sort of psychological cope, then that's exactly what you'd expect, isn't it? That it would show up in times of need and offer people, without providing a rational solution, because it's not true and it can't, it provides this evolutionary psychological purpose of, preventing people from falling into
despair. Of course, I agree with that completely. And that's why I think you need both the subjective and the objective rational side. It's the whole person. And I've tried as best I can through my life to devote myself, particularly to that rational side, because it's often that gets knocked down first. And the New Atheists did, some of them, quite a good job in knocking away the irrationality of some arguments that, sadly, Christians used to use, and I hope use a lot less. So it's tightened up.
And it is true. Like there's a lot I've heard so many bad arguments throughout the years for apologetics used by Christians. And I'm like, you shouldn't use that. That's not good. That's not good at all. And so, we do need to keep tightening up our language and our speech, and we do need to keep tightening things up and making sure that we're not giving bad arguments, and we're not just giving logical arguments that dismiss the person's feelings, that dismisses their suffering. That's the thing. You can't dismiss someone's suffering because their questioning about it makes you uncomfortable, right? Like if someone comes to you and says, how can there be a God because I am suffering? You can't just I'm uncomfortable. Dismiss the suffering. It's like, oh, here's a 5-step logical argument as to why, it's logically plausible and it makes sense that a good God can allow this to happen to you, blah, blah, blah. You actually miss the point, and you can actually fail in the Great Commission in that way. And so it's very, very important that you don't dismiss the person and the human being that's crying out for help in front of you. And if you guys want more videos like this, make sure you hit the subscribe button, and I'll keep trying to give you guys the best videos I possibly can.
I think the whole position, and also the broader level of academic philosophy, you've had developments where Christian philosophers have risen in the ranks, so to speak, to seriously influence the whole discipline. I think of people like Alvin Plantinga and so on. And that is another, I believe, a partial product of William Lane Craig, folk like that who have been impelled to take philosophy and science and so on seriously because they've had to face these challenges.
Yeah.
And that's a good thing to my mind.
I think it's worth pointing out that you're not claiming to have a solution here. I suppose we're pointing to a kind of a recognition of the problem in Christianity, which is to say, this alone isn't going to convince you that Christianity is true or something, but it's going to say that if you've got other good reason to believe that it's true,
absolutely,
this might not be enough to overcome those reasons.
Yeah.
And in a way, I sometimes think that's what faith is. Like if I'm asked to define faith, the way that I see it being used most, especially when it's used, so to speak, legitimately, In a religious context, it's often something like not having any evidence for the thing believed, like in the moment, but having a bunch of background evidence that like informs it. So like, people often say, well, you trust,
Yeah,
I mean,
I
you
would
just put
agree
this
with
glass
that.
of water on a table and you trust that the table won't collapse. You have no evidence. You've never seen this table before, presumably. Maybe you have, it might have been in Magdalen College for a long time, but you trust that it won't collapse. And although you have no evidence of that, you've got evidence that other tables haven't collapsed, that you've got good reason to believe that Magdalen College probably would replace a table that collapsed, that kind of stuff.
And I would agree with him there. I think that a lot of times in the suffering, you look at it's always a cumulative amount of evidence. For me, there's the origin of the universe. It doesn't make sense to me that nothing did something. So something did something. Something exploded. Nothing didn't explode. That's not what nothing does. It's a different kind of nothing. That's what I call something. Okay, a quantum vacuum is something. Where did it come from? Exactly, right? So you have, that one argument. You have a moral argument. I don't think there is such a thing as morality in atheism, so there must be a God of some kind. You have the arguments for the coherency of Scripture. You have, all of these different arguments. And then when you comes to, the problem of evil, I take all of that background stuff and I look at it all cumulatively together and I say, Christianity is my way in, and it is what makes the most sense as to why my suffering takes place, and it gives me purpose and meaning in spite of my suffering. And that's where we're going to leave it for today, guys. Leave your comments down below. I really do enjoy all of the questions that I'm getting. I enjoy the interactions with you guys, and I'll probably make a comment reaction to comments video at some point, sort of interact with you guys. And so leave your comments down below, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Cheers.